My name is Chris Casingena. I'll introduce myself in just a hot second, but this is called Site Wars, so we need to start this session appropriately. So let's get going. Oh, well that seemed to work particularly well. There we go. I have way too much time on my hands. Thank you very much. I'm not saying anything. I don't know about you, but whenever Star Wars started, I always struggle to read it, and then I stop and I skip a bit and just move on to the next bit that's fresh on the screen. I'm not the fastest reader, unfortunately. So now I'll introduce myself. My name is Chris Casingena, and I work for Combined Knowledge. See a few familiar faces from my courses in the audience as well. So if you want to contact me, I'm available on chris.casingena@combined-knowledge.com. I asked for Chris Casingena. They said no. I said it's easier. People don't have to try and spell my surname. It's not fair. But you can get into contact with me in quite a few ways. I've been working with SharePoint for about 7.5 years now, 3.5 with retail, and then I moved on to SharePoint training with Combined Knowledge. I specialize in end-user training. I'm currently looking into administration. I'm also quite competent with workflow designs as well. So part of my role at Combined Knowledge, I work with the Support Plus tool, which has been quite well advertised around the conference over the past couple of days. I am a content author for that particular tool. Everything I know, I try to distill into that product so we can give the same quality of education and training in a very quick to access format. Additionally, for the SharePoint Step-by-Step 2013 book, authored by Penny and Olga, I was the technical editor on that book as well, just to make sure that what they were writing was technically accurate. I did pull a few things out of that book. I said, we need to check this. And the due date for that actual book finished on my birthday, and we're still working on it, and I was working on it on my birthday to try and get that book to publish, otherwise they would have dropped it, so it's very lucky that came out. So anyway, let's talk about what we'll be discussing in the session today. Now, I've got lots of demonstrations that have just been dismissed off my laptop because the secondary hard drive went, but that doesn't mean we can't have some fun, so we're going to use Office 365 for my demonstrations. It should work. So what we're going to talk about is what goes into making a really good SharePoint environment. We're going to compare the intranet, which is quite thoroughly thought through, with something like a team site which might be used for either a department or a project or some kind of collaboration purpose. We want to talk about, when we go through our requirements gathering, which is quite thorough, what do we get out of it at the end point? And what do the collaboration users get in contrast to the comms team and other people who are stakeholders in things like the intranet? The one thing that we're going to sort of come to a conclusion is that we might want to use some of the cool stuff like aggregation tools that the intranet uses in our team sites. Just because their solution has been thoroughly thought through doesn't mean that we can't do the same thing. We're going to talk about the architecture that goes behind getting really, really good aggregation. Consistency is the key. We'll be talking about that and where that comes from. Then we'll talk about how to plan and update your site to make sure that you're aggregating the right content. And aggregation doesn't mean pull stuff from miles away. It can do, but sometimes aggregation starts with information within a list or library. That is just as important. We're also then going to talk about aggregating content within your site using SharePoint Webparts. There are some great Webparts that have existed for a long time. And there are some new Webparts that are well worth getting into and testing just to make sure you're getting the best use out of your SharePoint environment. We'll then talk about aggregation and scalability. So once we've got our content, how do we pull content from further afield? That's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. The problem is making sure that the information architecture is consistent across that entire platform or where you're trying to scale your information from. There's also a lovely new feature called cross-site publishing or cross-site collection publishing. I'm trying to abbreviate it. The full name is cross-site collection publishing. That is a feature that I'll be discussing in this session as well. Not in a lot of detail. It does require your farm administrators and your site collection administrators to consider how they're going to push content. We're going to discuss how that feature works. The thing is, when it comes to content aggregation, if you're using Office 365, you may have noticed that Delve is trying to aggregate content on a personal level. They're trying to make sure that they get the metrics around what's relevant to you and push information and content to you that you may have last worked on. Something might have been shared with you or emailed to you as an attachment. Delve is trying to find that information and surface to you. What we need to make a decision about is, what's better? Do we want an easy way to get our information, or do we want to spend the time getting the architecture right to make sure that we can get the correct business information to the right users? We'll have a bit of Q&A at the end of the session as well. And we'll be starting with the X-Wing at the top of the screen, which is what makes a good SharePoint environment. So, requirements gathering sessions, they can be quite scary. Let's talk about the intranet first. Bar Lord Vader's opinion, which is destroying the rebellion, there are actually some very consistent things that come out of requirements gathering for intranets. Quite often, the intranet is going to be very formal. Quite often, IT are involved with creating a group policy to push the intranet to everyone's Internet Explorer browsers. The idea is that when they start their working day, they're presented with the intranet that has all of the key business information on it. It's an idea of where they can sort of start and plan their day. Essential information, upcoming events, that information is being pulled into a single location. Now, that information can be stored across multiple locations. When users talk about planning an intranet, they quite often want to aggregate information from multiple locations, put it in a single location where people can easily access it. So, some of the scenarios that you might have is grouping relevant information. We also might want to make it more simple to find what you need. If anyone caught Virgil's session yesterday afternoon, it was a fantastic session on sort of planning your intranet and making sure that people can find what they need. If you didn't jump on that session, remember you get the DVDs at the end. You can always watch that session a little bit later. And then aggregating information from multiple sources and promoting the right content. Now, it's not a free-for-all, the intranet. It's normally very heavily controlled by a communications team. They want to make sure that the information going into that system is audited and controlled and accurate. So they adopt things like publishing features to make sure that that information is checked before it goes live, maybe scheduled with a go live and an end date, and has other controls around the kind of content that's being placed onto the form and made consistently and presented through web pages. Which would be quite different if you were the Rebellion or what we call the team site. I think team site users are quite rebellious, which is why we've got a sort of site war scenario. If we look at the conversations that come out of team sites, they're not so worried about this sort of process behind things being so heavily checked. Yes, of course, they would have security in place. They want to control who can access what. They also want to control auditing. Well, for such a collaborative environment, if I'm working on a document and my colleague has the ability to jump on that document to make their changes and I can come back in and change mine, I want to make sure that there's a clear audit history by using SharePoint versioning so that I can jump back through that content and potentially restore or make changes as necessary. So the idea behind this end user and collaboration experience is it shouldn't be hard. It needs to be flexible to allow people to work for both the collaborators as members of the site and your visitors as well as the site owners. Quite often we want workflows to be able to map business processes. The more we automate, the easier it is for us to get our jobs done. And we can take a task that takes us 10 minutes every day. We can save ourselves, well, like up just under an hour a week of production if we automate that process. So workflows are a very important part of team sites. Document auditing, as we've mentioned, securing confidential data, and essentially having a place that people know where to go to find that information. But one thing we haven't actually said anything about is aggregation at this point. quite a lot of the times when requirement gathering comes into play, we haven't really thought about, are we going to have top-level sites? And are those top-level sites going to surface information from the sub-sites and pull that up and maybe have like a dashboard? So effectively, we might have a project site, and then you stuff all your project information into there, and it's so cluttered and no one can find anything. Or you create a project site. Every sub-site is an individual project. But then no one has an overview of what's going on. So what do? We pick the information, we aggregate it up, we create a sort of dashboard for people to get an overview of what projects are going on, and they can then sync into the sub-sites if they need to and look at the individual information. So the requirements gathering creates rather a specific split in the type of content. That looks like a good idea. Need to get me one of those. So communication tools. So we've got the intranet. So the intranet is formal communications, corporate news, regional updates, maybe very heavily structured. Might even use audience targeting. I'll give you access to a knowledge base later where it will combine knowledge authors, free white paper articles on specific subject matter that you can download for free as PDFs. And I wrote a paper recently on audience targeting, so you can download that. And if you've been on a combined knowledge course before, you can print it off and stuff it in your courseware binder, which probably already weighs more than a ton at the moment, but that's fine. And it's potentially open to all users. The idea about an intranet is very transparent. We try to make it as accessible as possible, but very restricted. Whereas our team sites have less restrictions. We can organize as we will. Hopefully, the departments are in charge of their team sites, and they can master the sites and change them to be more business appropriate. We focus on collaboration. We share information. We secure what's needed. And we might have either siloed or scattered areas as our plan develops for our team sites. So there's nothing wrong with having information that's needed over here that's also needed over here. It's just joining the dots. So consider this. If you're trying to be wise, like Yoda, you may consider that many of the ideas that go into the corporate intranet are not just for the intranet. You can use them too. I'm going to tell you what you need to do that, and it may be a conversation that you need to have in a change advisory board or talk to your SharePoint team to see if these are features that you can enable to give you the same benefit. Quite often they'll say, well, these are intranet-based features. Why do we need them? Because I've seen a course and we can aggregate this content in the same way, and that can lead to additional benefits. So we can display essential information on the current site and supplementary pages, but it's being aggregated from multiple locations. So we're going to talk about aggregation now, and we're going to bring that content onto our home pages. There is an element of planning, of course. It's not always about the page, okay? The page is going to show information. People hit your home page, they want to see information. You're not going to have a very good time aggregating that information if your information is consistent in multiple locations. So what we need to think about is our information architecture. There are plenty of sessions in the conference that have talked about in a lot of detail things like content types. These allow you to define your business information, things like your news articles, policies, your expense forms, your purchase orders. If you define those, you've got an object that you can then aggregate. If you've spent no time working on any content types and you just upload documents and they sit in your libraries, you upload more documents to another library and you say, hey, I'd like to aggregate some documents, please. SharePoint goes, sure, here they all are. You say, I'd like to filter by what? This is a document and it has a name column, it has a title column, and that's your properties. So we need to be fairly careful as to how we sort of plan our architecture. But this is not something that, essentially it's better to do it at the start, but you can implement this later. The idea is trying to understand the business information that your team works with and whether that information is consistent across other locations and you can pull it together. So, where we've got things like the managed metadata service, which we'll discover in a moment, columns and content types, we can then start to define our business information. We've got other things that we can aggregate as well. Information can be aggregated from external websites. We'll talk about a few common web parts that we can use to aggregate content from external websites as well, because aggregation doesn't just mean internal. Aggregation can mean external content too. Can you see that? No? Oh. One second. Okay. I bought a tool. So that's the, it's quite noisy actually, and I don't want to lop anyone's arms off. So this is the managed metadata service. That's good, it'll stay quiet. The managed metadata service is basically going to host the keywords that you're going to use for your architecture. This can be defined centrally so that you can use it consistently across the entire platform. If you would like more information about this, this is the URL that you need. It's, if you go onto combined-knowledge.com and go /knowledge base, we've written an article on managed metadata service. There's even a session on YouTube from the conference 2 years ago, if you didn't attend, that will give you the opportunity to actually look at that content. Let's get this going again. Additionally, what you can do is define things like departments, sales, IT. This is actually proving more of a hindrance than a benefit. And you can then start to break down based on these particular objects. You can be quiet now. You're actually being quite a pain. So effectively, we've got our department information. You can build your metadata out as structured as it needs to be. The idea is that it's consistent across your entire organization. When you've got your metadata, you can buy third-party metadata, like packages of metadata that have been pre-built on an Excel spreadsheet, like a CSV file that you can just inject into your SharePoint environment. But it's better to build your own, because if you have your own taxonomy, it's relevant to your organization. So it takes time to plan, but you can distribute the management of your managed metadata service out to other people, make it department-orientated, and you can allow people to be responsible for their own managed metadata areas. Once the managed metadata service is set up, it's sourced into SharePoint as columns. You may know that you can create columns at the site collection level and allow them to be consistent across your entire site collection. So we can point the columns in our SharePoint environment at the managed metadata service and bring the wealth of those keywords into the columns, and we can either add those to our lists and libraries, but the better thing to do is add them to your content types. If you add them to your content types, you've got all the metadata you need to define what that object is. So that object as a content type might be a purchase order. What kind of metadata we need for a purchase order? Or maybe the purchase area, so we've got a code for that. The department, we might specify the approving manager. All of this metadata can be associated with your business form. It might be a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. We then add that content type to a document library. If that content type is needed elsewhere in SharePoint, like in another site, for example, we can take that content type, use it elsewhere, and now we've got this content type used in 2 locations, and because they're the same, we can then aggregate them back up. So what we're going to do is just have a look very briefly at these components and how they fit together. I know that some of you might have seen this in a session previously. We're only going to take a brief look at the content. This is a 365 environment, and this is just my typical team site. So what we're going to do is have a quick look around the site. We're going to be nosy and see what's going on. The first place I'm going to go to is look at this managed metadata service, this host of keywords. So this is our combined knowledge Office 365 site. Mark, hopefully there's no dirty words in the managed metadata service, are there? No, you've hidden them, thank you. And the pictures, good, good. Okay, so we're going to go into site settings, and I'm going to trust Mark that he's not done this. And then we're going to go into here, and what you'll notice, I'm just going to quickly launch a, oh, no I'm not. My secondary hard drive's gone, so are my tools, so I'll remember that for next time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into term store management. Sorry, I was going to load a really cool tool called Zoomit. It's free, and you can download it. It allows you to zoom in on the screen with a combination of keys. I can't use that because I've lost it now. So as you can see, we've got our managed metadata hierarchy being defined here, and this is farm-wide, so I can use any of these keywords. The keywords are sectioned up into individual repository locations, so I can drill down. And what we have here is a taxonomy of different areas of our business. If I drill down further, I can see other business areas, and I can keep drilling down as we go in. Now the idea is that I could split this up and give ownership of different areas of my managed metadata to different departments. HR could be in charge of things like job titles, departments, and offices around the world. IT might want a different strategy. IT might want to have assets logged and displayed in something like the managed metadata service. If they get a new laptop in and they've just purchased a new model, they might want to have like a laptop repository and document all of that information. So there's lots of different ways to use the managed metadata service, and it should never be one person's responsibility, because individual areas can be basically passed on to the relevant people who are going to use them by defining who the owners are, who the contributors are, and whether the managed metadata term set is open or closed to allow other people to contribute. So the idea is we take that and we put it into something like a site column. So if I go into site columns here, we have a rather nice selection of columns, pretty much made by Microsoft. There should be some custom ones in here though, and the idea is I could create a custom column, call it something, and the idea is if I select the manage metadata option here, so I choose manage metadata here, scroll to the bottom, the opportunity for me here is to actually drill down into my taxonomy from earlier and then choose the area that I wish to use. Any term in the hierarchy beneath my selection is therefore used in that column. And it's really end-user friendly. As they start typing in a value, it gives them suggestions orientated around the first few characters that they start typing. They can either delve into the hierarchy as well by using the metadata tag system. So this is a much more end-user friendly way of presenting information back to users, rather than a drop-down with 100 values in it, which could be quite time-consuming to use. You can then, after you've got a good collection of these columns, start associating them with content types. So if we go back, we have a content type gallery. And we can start to build our business information. If you've got that form that you have to fill out for your expenses every month, is that a form that should exist on your computer that's constantly out of date, or should it exist defined in a central location in SharePoint? If anyone wishes to update it, that change replicates across the entire environment. We can then associate our columns to these content types as well. So this is a content type that someone set up and called Demo for Daryl. So that's obviously someone else's demonstration, but what we've got is the opportunity to add additional columns which carry our metadata, which doesn't have to be managed metadata, it can be other columns as well, and define that on our content types. The content types are then added to the document libraries and lists that you want to use them in, and therefore you get the benefit out of that. Reason I'm not showing you all of that in a lot of detail, again, hard drive broken, so we'll skip to the next section. So the next thing is, once we've got our information architecture in place, you may be using content types, you may just be using a standard SharePoint app. What we're going to do is talk about ways to aggregate now. Ways to aggregate doesn't have to start with you looking at multiple sites and getting an idea of what you want to pull together. Aggregation can literally start in a single app. Now I say app, that's Microsoft's trendy way of saying lists and libraries, as well as third-party apps and on-prem custom apps. We'll be talking about apps in the context of lists and libraries. Aggregation in the form of a view is typically done by using groupings off metadata columns. The more metadata columns you have, the more opportunity you've got to reorganize that information. You can do special combinations in SharePoint as well. You've got the opportunity to combine things like groupings with totals. As you can see on this slide, what it gives us the opportunity to do is calculate the total for all of the information in this SharePoint list, and as we drill down into different layers, it recalculates that total and presents a subtotal. That stuff is very clever, and analysts quite like that way of presenting information. Now, I'll demonstrate that, but unfortunately at the moment my SharePoint lists available for me to demonstrate in is a little bit light in Office 365. So what I'll do is I'm going to have a quick look for a SharePoint site that might have some information that I can do a quick demonstration in. I have a site called Demonstrations, so that's probably a sort of good place to start looking. Okay, so hopefully we've got some like contact information or something like that. So at the moment, I don't have a lot of metadata to work with because I lost my VM, but not a problem. We can still talk about how we would actually put that view together. Now, we can essentially start to work with the columns in this SharePoint list or library, either works. We can then start to find columns that we want to condense by. So if you have something like a country column and the UK appears 9 times in that column, and you have to keep filtering and sorting, you could actually do a grouping, bring all the countries together and show every single individual country based on how many values are associated to that. You can only group by 2 columns though. It creates a kind of drill down folder structure, but it's still pretty cool. So how do we do this? We use a SharePoint view. And to aggregate, we go into standard view. You can give the view a name. You probably want to make it public if you're planning to use it as the way I'm going to use it, because what I can do is I can display that as a web part on my home page and then apply the view I created earlier to the web part, which makes for a good aggregation method. So I've got all of my columns here. I might highlight the created column, so I specify who it's been created by. And then as I drill down into the information here, here's group by. So you can group by 2 columns. There's a little bit of a letdown here. You can only group by columns that have singular values in it. If you've specified that your column's allowing multiple values, the group by will not have that column as an option. So if you've specified, oh, assigned to, I want assigned to have multiple people in it, when you declare multiple people in that column, essentially you won't be able to group by it. So it's a little bit of a shame, so you have to be careful if you're using multiple values in a column configuration. So I can sort of jump in here and sort of pick columns to group together by. In this particular scenario, I'm going to group by company, and then I'm going to group by who it was created by. Once I've done, I can also do other things like totals. I don't have any information that I can sort of tally up at the moment, so I'm just going to skip on, click on OK, and continue. Oh, I forgot to name it. This view is going to be called Summary Contacts. Now that's important because I'm going to use it later. I click on OK. System thinks about it for about 5 to 10 minutes. You can get a coffee, and then you come back to it. So we have essentially 3 companies that we're working with. We've got Engine XI, Methodology Matters, oh blimey, that's a tongue twister, and Trains by Dave. If you've been on our combined knowledge classes, you're probably familiar with Trains by Dave. We can drill down into this metadata, and it's presenting the second filter. All 3 of the values in Trains by Dave were created by a gentleman called Alex Fox, and as we drill down further, we get a breakdown of this information. Now that's a great way of aggregating. Rather than showing tons of information on one screen, if you've got a document library with so much information in that people can't make head nor tail of it and they're clicking page 1 to 30, page 31 to 60, it's not good. Too much information will put people off. Create columns, add metadata, bring that information down. You can then jump onto your home page and add that web part. The great thing about web parts is that you can carry a view that you've created earlier with it onto the home page. As an example of that, we're going to put information directly onto the system. You've got app parts, which are the lists and libraries that you've created. You can then choose the list. So that was contacts in this case, and I choose add. Now this is an aggregation. This is just presenting the information from my site in another location. This is just that information again. But we can use our view. I don't see many people doing this, but they should do it more often, is to actually go into the configuration of the web part, and you have the current view, which is just this generic option at the top. I click on the drop down, I can actually specify my summary contacts view. You'll get a prompt, which everyone reads in full detail, and then you click on OK. So this is very quick, and what it means is that you can, well, I said it's very quick. There we go. It's meant to be very quick. So what it can give me the opportunity to do is try to source all of my busy lists and libraries. I can aggregate them into a sort of dashboard view, and then I can chop it down by using that functionality. So that's quite nice. I'll save that. And now my users can come onto my home page. We've already got the contacts web part. This is why you can see contacts 1 and 2. I should probably rename that. But I can drill down. This one was created by myself. If I go into methodology, I also created this value as well, and these values are created by Trains by Dave. Unlike a folder structure where you can only go in, and then back out, and then back into another folder structure, you can now delve into multiple values at once. This is a great way of organizing document libraries as well. So we've got to remember that aggregation starts with apps. If you scale it up, just did our aggregation in apps demonstration, so we've just walked through that particular demo. The next thing to think about is aggregating from other locations in the site. So I could do something like find a particular content type that I'm interested in and start to pull from multiple sources to a singular location. The content query web part requires the publishing infrastructure, which is a site collection feature and a subsequent site level feature for publishing to be activated in your SharePoint site. So if you've just created a team site and you don't have the publishing infrastructure switched on in the parent site collection, the top level site, you won't see this opportunity. If you do see the content query web part in your selection of web parts, then you do have the opportunity to make use of this. What I really like about it is that, again, you've got audience targeting, which I've put a link to our knowledge base again here. I've written an article about audience targeting. So the reason that's up there is that I didn't want to get into a big talk about it, but if you want to read more about audience targeting, there's a knowledge base article there. The great thing is that you can go into your SharePoint libraries and lists and switch on a list or library settings feature called audience targeting. And it's just a tick box, so you tick it and you think, what's that done? When you go to the metadata of your documents or your items in that list, you have an audience field. Okay, let's have a look at that. So we'll go into this document library called Documents, believe it or not. Go to the Library tab, go to Library Settings, and once we're in here, we've got Audience Targeting Settings. Now, this may confuse people, but if you read the description at the top, this functionality is actually for use with things like the content query web part. So this doesn't audience filter your library, it audience filters the content that's pulled through on the web part. So if you switch on audience targeting and click on OK, give that a few seconds, go back to your document library, what's changed? Well, if I go to this Hong Kong logo document, well, it's a picture, and I go to edit the properties, I scroll down, bless you. Here's our target audiences right here, and I can specify an AD group, a SharePoint security group, individual named people. And the opportunity there is that once I've declared maybe different files or different content for different audiences, that doesn't change what people see in this library. Everyone still sees the same thing, security driven based on SharePoint security, but this functionality is for use with the content query web part. So if I go to my home page again, I'm going to edit the page and add the content query web part. Let's go to web parts. Go to content rollup, here's content query, and we choose add. Content query web part is heavily configurable, and it's even better if you're sourcing from other SharePoint sites, because you can filter based on list or site into subcategories. So it's quite cool. You can present it in a manner of different ways. It's appeared just down here as a very thin bar. So what I'm going to do is go to the properties. Okay. I love it when it opens this bar on the far right of the screen that you evidently miss if you don't know where to look. If I expand query, you can specify to show content from either all sites in the site collection or from specific SharePoint sites. In the terms of aggregation at the moment, I might only be looking to aggregate content from my current site. So I'd specify the location of the site that I may want to aggregate from. So I could go to Browse, choose my current site, which is annual production, and click on OK. And now we're just going to wait for that to ping, and that should be ready in a second. OK, next things to look at are what do you want to aggregate. So you can specify the location that you want to aggregate from, such as your SharePoint lists or libraries, the content type that you want to pull through. And notice this option, apply audience filtering. So that will read the audiences that you tagged onto all of your documents. Based on who you sign in as on SharePoint, I may work for the sales team, I would only see documents targeted at me through audience targeting. So that requires a little bit of setup, but if you're aggregating information from a library or list that has audience targeting configured, you can then basically choose what people see. And it's a very clever way of hiding content that's irrelevant and showing content that is relevant based on who you are. And we created one of my retail sites a store page like this. Every single store needs to see different promotions. What we did is we just tagged the promotions to the relevant stores. Everyone goes to the same page. They don't have to have their own store page to see the content, and they only saw their own offers. However, if someone needs to go to see all the offers, they just go to the library where they can see all the content. So I'm just going to pull out of that. So there are different ways to present the information that you aggregate as well. So what you can do later is you can actually choose to display that as files, or you can show it as little banners. It's quite clever in the way that it presents information, but nowhere near as clever as our next contender. So just a quick update. The content query web part requires the publishing feature, but it is available from 2007 to 2013, so it's been around for quite a while. So our new contender is going to be the search web part. Has anyone used the search web part? A quick raise of hands. Okay, so the search web part, of course, as the name suggests, works on your SharePoint search. The only failing it has really, in my mind, is how often you search through your content and build your search index. For example, the content query web part, if you create content that matches the content type but it's aggregating, it appears straight away. Very good. If you created an alert or a new news article that you wanted someone to see today and you index every night, then you're not going to see that content until the following day. So if you've got the continual crawl set up, so it may be run every 15 minutes, you can keep that nice and up to date. Otherwise, you may be at the mercy of how often your indexer runs. And because it's quite an intensive process, depending on your architecture, it might run out of hours so that it has no impact on live usage. So this is a 2013 option, so we have to have SharePoint 2013 available. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of talk about how to use this web part. Now, the great thing is that there are choices. If you're someone who particularly wants to customize the way that the web part works, you can go for the content search web part. If you want to jump straight to a previously configured version, which Microsoft have created for you, you can aggregate things like pictures and pages and other content directly. Let me show you what I mean. If you go to insert a web part, let me just sort of clear some of this content down a bit. Don't need that anymore. And we'll get a bit more space back. And what I'm going to do is add the content query, remove the content query web part and add some search web parts. Okay, so I'll go to insert, I'll go to web part. Now, it appears in two locations, which is nice and confusing. Under content rollup, you've got content search. This is the kind of jack of all trades option. You can use it in multiple ways to aggregate the information that you need based on the content type, the search results you bring back, and refiners. The other thing that you can do is go for the easy option. Sometimes we like easy options. The search-driven content category gives you pre-configured options. So you can just grab pictures, pages, popular items, recently changed items, recommended items, videos, web pages, and wiki pages. So if you've got like a knowledge base and you're tagging it correctly, you could actually aggregate the knowledge base articles, present it in the search web part, and rotate through them, which is quite nice. We like things that look pretty that take very little to configure. Now, let's say we don't like the easy option. Okay, let's have a look at the hard option. So you'd pick one of these if they matched what you wanted. However, we're going to go for the hard option. So we go to content search and just chuck it in there. This is either as simple as you want it to be or as configurable as you want it to be. You can really get into the nitty-gritty when it comes to configuring this web part. Already, it's going, hey, look, we've done a search and we think you want to see this content. And I'm thinking, where's it getting this from? Well, let's see what's in the configuration to see what's going on. So you hit Edit Web Part, wait 5 minutes, get a coffee, and then go to the screen. Right, so at this point, we've got the option to change the query at the top of the screen. And what it's doing is it's basing this off a search, and all it's doing is it's finding recently changed items. So I can actually switch to any one of the following options. And remember those pre-configured options we talked about earlier? They're just these configurations here, but not in as much detail. So you could do maybe SharePoint list items and documents that match specific tagging that you've utilized. So if you tag the document with a specific customer's name, you could bring that content back over. You could find local information and pages. So if you wanted to grab something like your news articles, you can aggregate those back to a single source. I'm really hoping we have some good pages in the SharePoint site. I don't know what it's going to pull back. So fingers crossed it's not anything too bad. Ooh, it's just found a single page. That's no good, so let's find something else. Let's find pictures. Oh, that's even more dangerous. Oh, no, you got rid of the bad pictures, didn't you? That's okay. Boris is my chinchilla. I'm not too happy that he's gone. Okay, so select a query. We're going to go for pictures, restrict app by current site. So later we'll talk about extending the scope of this. We can do that by specifying here. And then you can do further restrictions. If you're familiar with SharePoint search, you'll also know that you get refiners as well. Refiners are the metadata associated with your search results. So when you search for, I don't know, policies, you get the document type, PDF, Word, PowerPoint. You get who the author was, when it was last created. You get that and more in this particular section. So you see you've got the display author, Chris Casingena, you've got Ash in there as well. You've got the picture content type. Unfortunately, it's just grabbing everything at the moment. We're not being specific. So if you wanted to, you could flick refiners across the screen and get that content back. This will be better if you've created your own content types because the search refiners will be relevant to the metadata associated with the content types you're pulling back. There's additional options for specifying how this actually renders on the page, whether it renders first and delays the rest of the page load time, or whether it sort of just loads as it does and allows the rest of the page to come up. And there's also additional content for testing your query as well. Once you're happy, you've got multiple display options to kick that back into the system. So you can display it as pictures, rotating banners. If it's a video, you can get like little play videos, tiles and stuff. So we can choose the way that that displays back to the end user. So what we might do is go for the recommended option, 3 pictures on the left. No, I actually quite like the rotation one, which is quite good. We'll just go for that one, but it's recommended for now. Click on OK. Fingers crossed about the pictures. Hopefully shouldn't be too offensive, but we'll see. Well, we've got David Haitler, but we don't have, I think it's got a few things that it's not sort of quite worked out yet, but we could fix that with filters. But we just aggregated content, we're presenting it back. So one of the things that I had on my virtual machine that didn't make it this morning was basically I was grabbing blogs and I had a column for the author's picture and I had the picture of the latest blogs in the system, the author's profile photo, and then some information underneath it. I also had news articles just swishing on a little banner that showed you the top news article and the associated thumbnail image. It looked really good. You'll have to take my word on that. But I just had to do what I can with the 365 environment, so I hope you can appreciate that. So how far can we aggregate? Essentially, it depends on what you want to do, but the consistency in your content types will help you aggregate more accurately across multiple locations. So at the moment, most of the options that we've been using is just focused at the same site. Your content query web part is limited to the site collection. So if you have multiple site collections, your content query web part cannot extend beyond that location. Your search web parts can go way beyond that across the entire farm. But if you want to go across multiple farms, we're going to have to tell you about something that's a little bit newer. But just to return to the current site that we're working on, internally, you might require the consistent architecture first, but essentially you can then extend the scopes of the web parts. So in the configuration for the content query web part, you can escalate it to the site collection. For the search web parts that we were just looking at, you can also escalate that across all SharePoint sites. For external aggregation, you've got lots of different options available in web parts as well. You can grab RSS feeds from maybe weather forecast sites and pull them straight onto your homepage. We can grab content from YouTube and embed that onto your page as well. And you've also got things like the page viewer web part to take content, maybe terms and conditions or other relevant business information, and place that on your page. If you're looking at cross-farm publishing, it doesn't have to be that extensive, but let's talk about cross-site collection publishing. What it allows you to do is turn a SharePoint site into a content source. You could either push from one location to multiple locations or push from multiple locations to a single location. This allows you to go from site to site collection, or even farm to farm if you so wish to. Now, this requires collaboration from your site collection administrators and your farm administrators to get this set up efficiently. Because this is an information worker track, we're just discussing it as a potential option, but we're not really going to sort of get into the rules and mechanisms that generate it. But essentially, it's a site collection feature that has been added to the SharePoint 2013 product. It can publish content from authoring sites to an intranet or a public site. It can also be used to push content from one site to many. So effectively, you can aggregate, which is why we're bringing it up in this session. This information can be things like files and web pages, so you can actually try to aggregate information from multiple publishing sources or publish from a single source to multiple locations. To finish off the aggregation, we've had a look at the web parts earlier and I'm just conscious of the time at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll just do a quick couple of luxury demonstrations that I can definitely do without the use of my VM, such as the Rss and YouTube aggregation. So we've talked about internal content, and we can customize our web parts further to aggregate from further afield. Otherwise, we could do the following things. So if I want to, I could jump to YouTube. Now, oh, I might watch that. Anyway, not getting distracted by YouTube, quickly let's navigate away before terrible stuff happens, because you never know what will happen on YouTube. Oops, spelled it wrong, but still found it anyway. If I jump into videos, let's grab a video of Steve at the conference. So this is the Evo conference, sorry, the roadshow from last year. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Share, and under Share we've got an embed option. Now the advantage of doing something like this over putting the video in your SharePoint environment is that you're not cluttering your expensive SharePoint databases with lots and lots of videos. We could essentially grab videos from a YouTube channel and place them straight onto our page. This is easily done actually. In 2010 you could do this by editing the HTML of the page. 2013 you don't have to do that. You simply find out where your mouse cursor is actually on the page, hopefully somewhere. We go Insert, Picture, and we should be able to embed. Maybe I don't have the, oh no, I'm on Picture. There we go. That would help. So you chuck it in. There's your video, there's Steve, there's Andrew Connell. Just trying to grab something. We go to Insert. Put that content directly onto the page. So we have the functionality of YouTube streaming directly onto our web pages. So we're aggregating content from much further afield. We're going to another website and pulling it across. Some people say, I work in an office that doesn't have any windows. I've done that once. It was a lot of fun. Essentially, if you want to know what the weather is outside, you might have to jump on a website. But why jump on a website when we could sort of do something like this? We could insert a web part. We could aggregate from an RSS source. So go to Content Rollup, go to RSS Viewer, and we choose Add. Whilst this is adding on the page, I could go something like to BBC Weather. And we can find out what the weather is locally. You can work out if you need an umbrella or anything like that. So a lot of websites have the RSS functionality, so you can click on that and choose the RSS feed you'd like to use. Grab it. And we're going to aggregate that to our SharePoint site too. So there's the RSS viewer. Here it says Open Tool Pane. Click on OK. Find the toolbar, which always appears well off the screen. Pop your URL in. You can customize it, maybe change the Chrome, change the title, but we're running short on time, so I'm just going to click on OK. And that should provide me with the RSS feed. There we go. So there's our London weather. Yes, it doesn't have a big cloud and it doesn't have sun coming out of it, but I think people can still read, so they don't need that visual representation. If they really want to, they can sort of click on the forecast, it drills down, tells them more information. They can jump directly to the content if they so wish. So that's quite cool. So aggregation can come from further afield. Our web parts are configurable to extend to the site collection and to the farm level. Our additional features in 2013 can go cross-farm, and we can even aggregate from other websites as well. And this is all out of the box. We're not using any third-party applications, any code. This is all information worker. So we've just created a decent site. But doesn't Delve do this? This is the end to our tale. Microsoft are producing ingenious ways of presenting information back to us, but the algorithm behind Delve is going to basically grab information based on your preferences. It's not heavily customizable. So, as Delve is developed by Microsoft, it will become more and more comprehensive, giving you more ways of finding information that's important to you. At the moment, Delve finds content from your OneDrive in Office 365 or on-prem. Oh, no, sorry, it's not on-prem yet, but they're saying they might get something similar in 2016. But it finds information from your OneDrive and SharePoint, content that you've recently worked on, content that you've been shared, or is being shared with you. And more recently, apparently, if you're sort of receiving emails, your attachments on your emails are also presented in Delve as well. In fact, Delve has recently been mentioned in the Office 365 blog. So this is actually pulling information now from your My Site, and My Sites are, I'd say that people's My Sites could be better presented, and I think this is actually looking quite nice now. So you've got your link, you've got your My Sites, you've got your org chart, and you've got things like praising. Praising's sort of finally sort of taking shape. Let's just go a little bit further down on the page. So this is also starting to look quite nice as well. But again, though, your control over the way this is presented to you is not extensive. So the question is, what will work better for you? You can put a lot of hard work into aggregating that content, but someone might just say, oh, I can find my local information on Delve. I can just find what I worked on yesterday. It's really cool. You say, well, we've just managed to source all of the news articles from this location and this location and this location and brought it all to one place. They say, well, that's not really relevant to me, because Delve's always orientating itself around the personal experience, whereas when we try to aggregate information, we're trying to make sure that we present people with the information that they want, but we can't guarantee that 100% of the people are going to be happy with what they see. So we've got a choice, and it's quite a hard choice because there are consequences to what you pick. Do we like Delve, or do we prefer things like content aggregation? We're going to take a vote, and based on your vote, we're going to basically play out the rest of the conference based on that. So, has anyone used Delve, first of all? This is going to be a fairly swift argument then. So, if you'd like to sort of suggest that sort of Delve is going to be consistently developed by Microsoft, similar to Yammer, and consistently improved, it may become better. But maybe not just now. Maybe it's something that's going to really become big in maybe a few months' time, because you can see that they're putting work into it. Or do we prefer things like aggregation? So let's take a vote. What do we think about Delve? Do we like Delve? That's nice. I'm glad to see that. Keep an eye on the Microsoft Office 365 blogs. Lots of good information on there. Who likes content aggregation? More people. You've got the control, and if you set it up right, you'll get the reward for it as well. It's a big return on investment when people can find content, because the first thing people think about SharePoint, how do I find my information? If you've planned your sites well and you planned your content types and you use these tools that we discussed in the session, you have a success story that allows people to find the information from multiple sites. So let's play out this scene. Can we have sound at the back? There is an alternate ending to that. Did anyone want to see it? Yep? Okay. So we'll go back. I showed my presentation to Steve, and I said, Steve, is it okay to destroy Delve with the Death Star? He said, cool. But since people at Microsoft will be at this conference, you probably want to give people a choice. So at least we're being fair. So I was like, okay. I said to Steve, I'll make another one. So this is the alternate based on Steve's request. Oops. If it will play.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Okay, hopefully I've done quite well for time. Oh, look at that, 1 minute to spare. So, just to summarise, again, huge apologies on my account for the failed hardware. We were literally working from half an hour right up to this conference started to try and fix the hard drive. That's why there's no back on it and it's missing components. But the primary hard drive worked to have my presentation. And isn't it wicked that Office 365 pulled through for me? I didn't actually have any other way of presenting if Office 365 wasn't working. So actually, I'm going to give it brownie points today. But essentially, it was the content that was important. So a great site requires planning. If you have the right information architecture in place, you can drive that navigation, aggregation and content. Presenting app data is essentially made much easier if you use the grouping options in a view to condense that information down. Content query and search web parts give you the opportunity to drive content to your SharePoint pages from multiple sites. And there's a selection of web parts that allow you to aggregate from external sites as well. If you're interested in cross-site publishing, speak to your site collection or farm administrators about the potential to actually drive content from multiple farms. So thank you very much for attending this session. I appreciate your patience with the demonstrations. If you have any questions, just come up to the front. I'll answer any questions that anyone has after these sessions over. So thank you very much.